election officials. And this is a point really that we have to underscore. The threats against election officials who are oftentimes simply volunteers. These are people who are simply volunteering their time to help all of us undertake the most fundamental right we have, the right to vote, the right that secures all the other rights. These are people who are being threatened simply for doing their job. It's wrong, it's unacceptable, and it should stop. And we are doing everything we can to expose that and hold individuals who are perpetrating those threats accountable.
Here's what happened just this week on this front. NBC News reports this, quote, a senior law enforcement official confirmed that election officials in at least 6 states received packages Monday, but said that so far none of the packages have been found to contain any actual hazardous material. Secretaries of State, Attorney General's offices, and state election offices in Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Tennessee, Wyoming, and Oklahoma were targeted. The return address identified the sender as the USTEA, U.S. Traitor Elimination Army. That election officials, who, as Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco points out, are just volunteers, that they would be seen as traitors, is cause and effect, right? It's a result of a poison coursing through our democracy, the lie told by Donald Trump that the 2020 election was stolen from him, followed by the lie that this election would be stolen. And the person fomenting that lie is running for the White House again. Because of all of this, election officials are stocking up on Narcan. They have installed bulletproof glass and panic buttons. And in Washington, Democrats are preparing for a possible showdown again on January 6, 2025. Over on Capitol Hill, Politico reports this, that Democrats are, quote, hoping that Kamala Harris will win in November and they'll flip the House too, meaning it would likely be Hakeem Jeffries holding the Speaker's gavel as the process of certifying a Harris victory gets underway. It's another scenario that is nagging top House Democrats, that Speaker Mike Johnson might keep his majority as Harris wins and finds himself in a position where he could obstruct the counting of electoral votes and possibly throw the election to the House under the constitutional provisions of the 12th Amendment. Johnson, after all, led House Republicans in filing an amicus brief after the 2020 election, asking the Supreme Court to essentially overturn swing state results. Now he's leading a charge suggesting that undocumented immigrants are voting en masse in what Democrats view as a coordinated effort to sow doubt in the election and lay the groundwork for mischief. Officials bracing for the worst and preparing to defend the way our democracy functions before, during, and after the 2024 presidential election is where we start. In a moment, we'll be joined by the Colorado Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, and voting rights attorney, Mark Elias. But we start with New York Times reporter Nick Corsiniti, who's been on this beat for years now. Nick, I feel like you have this extensive and vast body of reporting that takes us through the voter suppression laws, first championed and passed and signed into law in Georgia, through the antics of non-certification, refusing to certify, things being maybe beta tested in Nevada. Take me through the state of play today, as we're now less than 50 days ahead of a general election.
Well, I think, unsurprisingly, we're back in the state that really first caught national attention after the 2020 election, and that's Georgia. The state election board in Georgia, which has recently seen a right-wing 3-2 majority take over the board, is passing new rules that are really concerning not just Democrats, but Republicans and election officials and everyone from the county level to the state level in Georgia that could possibly disrupt the post-election period. We're talking about, the certification, the counting votes, the tallying of votes, and the sending off of electors to the Electoral College. So last month, they passed a rule that would allow for local election officials to take a reasonable inquiry before they certify, which has raised a lot of concerns about whether that could throw certification into question. Now, they're scheduled to meet on Friday, and they have over a dozen new rules and new proposed agenda items. We're less than 50 days out of an election. So Secretary of State Raffensperger's lawyer sent a pretty scathing letter to the state election board saying, you really shouldn't change these rules. The board of every county election official known as Gavrio in Georgia, they sent a similar letter telling them to stop. So we'll see what happens on Friday with the state election board in Georgia. But when it comes to concerns about these new laws, that's where we see the most action, at least right now.
Nick, let me just play some of the sworn testimony from election officials from 2020, at least half of them Republicans like Brad Raffensperger.
It has all gone too far. All of it. Joe DeGenova today asked for Chris Krebs, a patriot who ran CISA, to be shot. A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason because he was transferring a report on batches from an EMS to a county computer so he could read it.
And then about 45 minutes later, we started to hear the noises outside my home, and my stomach sunk, and I thought, it's me. And then it's just, we don't know what's going to, I mean, the uncertainty of that was what was the fear. Like, are they coming with guns? Are they going to attack my house? I'm in here with my kid.
After the election, my email, my cell phone was doxxed, and so I was getting text all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting.
We have various groups come by, and they have had video panel trucks with videos of me proclaiming me to be a pedophile and a pervert and a corrupt and politician, and blaring loudspeakers in my neighborhood, and leaving literature both on my property, but arguing and threatening with neighbors and with myself.
I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter, Shay, to push their own lies about how the presidential election was stolen.
I've gained about 60 pounds. I just don't do nothing anymore. I don't want to go anywhere. I second guess everything that I do. It's affecting my life in a major way, in every way, all because of lies. For me doing my job, same thing I've been doing forever.
So, Nick, I played that because that is what Donald Trump achieved last time, without all the rules changes, without the laws being changed in statewide in Georgia and with this election board that you're talking about. Can you give us some specific examples of how the laws have been changed to make that effort easier in 2024 for Donald Trump?
Sure. I think it's important to look at laws like what changed in Georgia, reorienting the state election board to give it more partisan control, taking the authority from local election officials or secretaries of state away and handing it to partisan entities, removing processes that were trusted in the 2020 election, like drop boxes for mail ballots, taking those out of the equation. We've seen that across the country. But what I think is really important to look at now is not just how those laws have changed, but how there's active lawsuits and active litigation to try and further change the rules, and we're less than 50 days out. So there's, been lawsuits by the former president targeting mail ballots in Nevada, ones that could arrive late as allowed by the state law in Nevada. You have a little bit of a grace period, and they're trying to say, no, anything that arrives after Election Day must be thrown out. So that alone could, disenfranchise legal votes under Nevada law. But what it could also do is it puts into question a certain bucket of ballots, for lack of a better word. And then those could be used as, say, evidence in a future challenge. And we're seeing lawsuits already try and establish that there could be, certain questions or numbers of ballots that would indeed throw an election into doubt. At least that argument's being made, and it's certainly being made by the former president on social media. So as we kind of head into this final sprint in the general election, it's these lawsuits that are kind of taking advantage, I think, of some state laws that have been passed, and are going to really put that to the test. And new federal laws that have been tested, like the Electoral Count Reform Act, through the courts in their first general election coming up in November.
Nick Orsini, stay close to the cameras for the next 50 days. We're going to need you. Thank you for starting us off today. I want to bring into our coverage Colorado Secretary of State Janet Griswold. She's one of the election officials who was sent a suspicious package that is now under investigation. Also joining us, voting rights attorney, founder of the site Democracy Docket, Mark Elias. Mark, I start with you just to pick up on the point Nick was just making about the frivolous lawsuits being filed to throw into question the results in the minds of the base of supporters. And amid that base, of course, are the people who were inspired to travel to Washington on January 6th because they believe that lies. We heard them in their own words testify before the Select Committee. People like Mr. Ayers, who said he believed Donald Trump. Tell me the state of play now, 50 days out from the election.
Yeah, Donald Trump has relied on frivolous litigation his entire career. Everyone needs to understand that. He used frivolous litigation in his career as a builder. He used frivolous litigation in his career as a casino owner. He has used frivolous litigation to try to intimidate his adversaries and his enemies throughout his career. And one statistic that will hopefully put this into perspective is in 2020, if you look from January 1st to September 16th, basically a couple of days ago, the Republican Party and their allies had filed 13 lawsuits. Okay, that's actually, if you think about it, a lot of lawsuits to make it harder to vote. But that was how many they filed in 2020. This year, they have filed over 80. They are flooding the courts with litigation aimed at one thing and one thing only, making it harder to vote and making it easier for them in the post-election to contest elections. They're not going to get away with it. They're losing these lawsuits, and Democrats are fighting back, and we're all fighting back, and they're not going to succeed. But they are trying to weaponize the courts in the way in which they have weaponized so many other institutions of government to try to merge their political support for the election denier movement with an operational support, whether that operational support be in court or, God forbid, we see another January 6th.
And Mark, one of the ways you've explained sort of then versus now is that last time they went up against you 61 times, they lost 60 times. Your sort of cautionary note is that some of their attorneys are better, but it would appear that the facts are just as flimsy. Just sort of handicap the prospects for any legal success.
Yeah, so those 13 and 81 numbers that I said, that's pre-election litigation. So yeah, in the post-election in 2020, we saw Donald Trump and his allies file 65 lawsuits. They lost 64 of them, and that was that was great. It was bad for the country that was put through that, but it showed that the courts would hold and the courts would not yield to a barrage of frivolous litigation. The problem is that since then, Republicans have been studying what they did wrong in 2020, in addition to not having the facts on their side, and they have upgraded their legal talent. We are not seeing in court right now. My law firm is involved in 50+ lawsuits right now, and we are not seeing in court, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and Sidney Powell. The lawyers that the Republican Party have are better. They have upgraded that talent, and frankly, a lot of Republican lawyers who I think were shocked and appalled by Donald Trump in 2020, they've capitulated. The Republican legal establishment has capitulated in the same respects that we have seen the Republican Party's electoral